Hi, my name is Jane Scarf, and I'm coming to you from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And my message today is for anyone who's having problems with the federal government with regard to mandatory mask requirements for planes or for your work, or any kind of mandatory PCR testing. And again, that's also for travel, because travel is part of the federal government's mandate for planes, or vaccination, like you're working for some government department and they're requiring vaccination. This video will give you some assistance on how to address that. So first and foremost, you want to be looking at the Canadian Bill of Rights. That document is legislation that was passed in 1960, and it was the intention of the authors of that Bill of Rights was to articulate or capture or enshrine, is another word they use for it, our natural rights, our common law rights. And you'll see in that document, it recognizes your rights. It doesn't designate your rights. It recognizes your rights. And it commits the federal government to protecting those rights. And specifically, the right that relates to the issues of mask, PCR testing, and vaccination, mandatory, or even where there's coercion. Like, okay, well, you can come to work, but you have to go in the corner somewhere where there's no other staff or clients, or things like that, or even work from home. That's a sanction applied to. Just a minute, I'm running out of battery here. That's a sanction applied to that process, and it's the same as mandatory. If it's some kind of an adverse condition that they're imposing. Now, primarily, what we have in Canada, relevant to the or related to the Canadian Bill of Rights, is the right to have voluntary informed consent for any medical procedure. So currently, we're being faced with a variety of different techniques and strategies to try and make us wear a mask, take a PCR test, coercion into having a vaccine. And one thing I forgot at the beginning of this video is quarantine also, whether it's mandatory or whether you're being pressured and denied access to things and stuff like that. That all relates. Like, it doesn't have to actually straight out say that you must have it or else. It can be the second form of, well, if you don't have it, you can't travel, or you can't have this job, or you can't shop here, things like that. Same thing. Exact same thing. It's a violation of that right. And that right is enshrined in 1A of the Canadian Bill of Rights. And what it says in 1A is we have the right to life, liberty, and security of person, and enjoyment of property, and not to be deprived thereof except by due process of law. And if you look at Section 2, due process of law requires a federal act of Parliament that expressly states that your right is going to be overridden. That has not currently occurred. Therefore, all of the federal policies, bylaws, whatever employment related issues like mask requirements, all that, all contrary to the Canadian Bill of Rights, and therefore illegal. So you have the legal right to refuse those items, and I'll repeat them again: wearing mask, PCR testing, vaccine, and quarantine. And quarantine includes the closure of everything, like requiring that there be no more than 5 people in your house, or the requirements for churches, to have like ridiculous conditions such as were applied to Pastor Coates, where he could only have 15% of his congregation attending, 6 feet apart, with a mask on, and no singing in the church. Like, yeah, that does not qualify as a bylaw that meets the requirements of the Canadian Bill of Rights. It absolutely does not, and clearly does not. And therefore, the government does not have the authority, the legal authority, to be doing that stuff. So your defense is simple. Not wearing the mask, and any consequence, you're going to sue them under Section 1A, or even ask for an injunction, because it's dangerous. They're not, like with masks, I'd like to explain, wherever it's being required, and clearly you can do this with any federal, like the post office, for example. Anybody having been denied service from the post office because there's no exemptions, you don't have to pursue the right to an exemption, because you don't even have to wear the mask in the first place, even if you don't have an exemption. And especially post office, because post office is federal, so boom, it falls right under the Canadian Bill of Rights. So what they're failing to do there is they're failing to give you the choice of whether you want it or not, because a mask is a medical procedure. It's something they're doing to help control the spread of communicable disease. It's a medical procedure. So what else they're doing? So it's mandatory, not voluntary. And secondly, they're not informing you of the risks. And information is available readily that would let them understand or know what the risks are, and then they have an obligation to tell you what those risks are. And just briefly, the risks are you're rebreathing bacteria that's being expelled from the body, so that's going to raise your chances of getting some sort of a bacterial infection. Same viruses, we expel them from the body, that's how we fight them. So the mask, you rebreathe them. And carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is classified as a noxic substance. So not only is it negligence, because it's, or not negligence, not in the case of where the federal government's doing it, it's breach of duty, because they're not complying with the legal requirements to make their decisions with the Canadian Bill of Rights. But it's also negligence because they either knew or should have known that these risks exist, and they don't tell you about them. And so your tort would be neglect. You know, if you're going to sue them, it's neglect and breach of duty. And it's very, very good case, because this is for mask, anything to do with mask. PCR test, there's also risks. They don't tell you the risks. Yeah, when they're putting it way up your nose, there's a risk of breaking the brain barrier. And there's also people saying that there's medical risks regarding the fibers that are on these things, and I'm not sure of that one, but they should be, if they're requiring it or even pressuring you or denying you service or employment or whatever they're doing without this information. So it has to be voluntary, and they have to inform you of. So even if it was voluntary and then you chose, okay, I'll have it, but they didn't tell you the risks, they're responsible for anything that happens to you. And so that's a really good case. So if it's a post office denying you service, your claim would be, actually there would be two. You would also go after the mayor of the city for implementing these mask policies, and the director of Canada Post, and the charge would be negligence and breach of duty for both. So yeah, that takes care of that. So for employment, you can refuse where there's a risk of danger and ask for an investigation. You can actually refuse. If you're working for the federal government, they're required to do the Canadian Bill of Rights. So you can just straight up refuse. No, I'm not doing it. I have a right. I've chosen no. Stop. But you can also challenge that they're not telling you about the risks, and they're often they're requiring you to wear either the medical one, which is the blue one, or the N95 one. Those two are called PPE, which is personal protection equipment, and there are very strict employment laws about the safe use of those masks. So if your employer, even if you're not working federal government, any employer that's requiring those masks have to meet the occupational health and safety standards requirements for the safe use of those masks. And they're extensive. Fit test for the individual that has to wear it, testing the environment to make sure there's an excessive amount of oxygen so that it can offset the loss of oxygen when you have the mask on, and then testing to make sure that there's enough oxygen, the person's ingesting enough oxygen, and that they're not ingesting too much carbon dioxide, because there's dangerous levels. And they're supposed to also fit the mask to each person, and if it's not a sterile environment, it's supposed to be changed every 15 minutes to half hour. So you can refuse work based on the safety factors, and you can't be fired if you do that. There's a process. Look it up in each province. I believe every province has it. Ontario definitely does. It's a process for refusing unsafe work, and there's a few steps. In Ontario, I'll just say quickly, the steps are writing a letter to your immediate supervisor, email, like just in writing, some sort of writing, to your immediate supervisor and tell them you're refusing the work. If they're requiring you to wear a mask, you're refusing the work with the mask. And then if they don't, or if they respond negatively or don't respond at all, or whatever, then you go to the Occupational Health and Safety Committee and make the same request for them to allow you to not wear the mask. Or, I mean, alternatively, they could do the things that I've just described to make it safe. But if they just straight up, you're wearing it and we're not taking the safety precautions, then you've got a very good case. And then the next step is to go to Labor Board. And if you don't get a cooperation from the Labor Board, you can escalate that. You can appeal their decision. Yeah, you can put pressure, that they're not doing their job. Because if you look at the national occupational health and safety standards, it says that all across the board. It also applies to provincial, everything, municipal. Those standards have to be met. They can pass their own legislation, but they can't go lower than those standards. Those standards are the required standards for the country. So you're good to go there. And federal government, same thing for vaccine and PCR tests as an employee. In the federal government, straight up no, because you have a right under 1A for all federal matters. And if you work federal government, federal matter. So just no, straight up. And for somebody that's not working for federal government, you'd want to use occupational health and safety standards also for those items, because vaccine has not even been tested yet. So there's no way that they can confirm its safety. Hasn't even been tested. Nobody can say that it's safe. And they haven't finished or even started, or I think they started animal testing or something, and it was a big failure, and then they just got, okay, so let's skip that and go right to using it on humans. And in Canada, it has not, those vaccines have not been approved by Health Canada. They're only approved for emergency use. So that should be told to each person that's getting the injection. They should be told, or that's thinking of getting it, they should be told that there's a risk, and it's fairly high risk. I just heard the numbers this morning. I think it's just from, I believe it's the Pfizer, 200 deaths in Canada. That's intense. And 4,000 vaccine injury. Like that is like, and severe injury. Like it destroys the nervous system, and they're shaking, and they can't do anything. They have to have somebody looking after them. They can't even make food or, make a bed or sit. They're just shaking. Their head and their whole body is shaking. It's just outrageous. And I'm not sure if the Pfizer, but one of them has a high rate of Bell palsy also, which is, I'm not a medical person, so don't take this if I don't get this right, but it's sort of like some kind of stroke, because, you know, the I think it's the right side goes numb, and they can't talk, you know, so that their mouth looks, you know, screwed up. And it's pretty serious, not as serious as the disability injury, but serious nonetheless. So nobody can be forcing you, because if you're working for federal government, because of the Bill of Rights, because you have the right to voluntary informed consent. And in other places, you have the right under occupational health and safety standard to safe work. So the vaccine cannot be regarded as safe work. So if they're telling you you can't continue in your employment because you won't have the vaccine, you're good to go with a good strategy. So that's about it for today. I just wanted you to know that we can fight, and whenever possible, pull out that rusty Bill of Rights and you know, shake it off and just wave it and say, hey, I have rights. And unlike the Charter, you don't have to get a couple of wheelbarrows of money and file a constitutional challenge and wait for whatever length of time, and then get a court to tell you that, oh yeah, I guess you do have those rights, or not. You know, like, it's debatable if you go down that road. You have those rights with the Canadian Bill of Rights. It can't be applied to all situations, but most situations that involve this stuff, because it's a lot of it they're doing with enforcement, with police enforcement, so which that would fall under the Canadian Bill of Rights. So they're not allowed to use police enforcement for any of this crap. So that's a good relief. And the municipal bylaw officers are also regulated under the criminal code, so they can't be smashing into your house and, you know, doing all that stuff that these Ontario emergency orders are instructing. And like I've said many times, and I'm so grateful for, in Ontario, 44 out of 44 regional police have refused to enforce the stay-at-home orders. And to date, I'm not saying that it's never happened, but I'm not seeing the police entering homes to see if there's too many people in the home and shutting the home. Same with the business, all that. These bylaws say they can do that, but they're refusing. So I'm also assuming that they're refusing under the Canadian Bill of Rights, not the Charter, because the Charter wouldn't let them refuse. The Charter would require them to follow the law until the judge decides down the road that these laws are in violation. So they're refusing now. So that means they're using their own discretion and their own obligations under the Canadian Bill of Rights. So again, I am very, very grateful, because we need the police and the military backing us up right now, because this country's under attack. There's a very strong concerted effort being made to take the country over with a communist agenda. And you can see that there's quite a bit of infiltration, and there's quite a bit of financial investment into pulling this off. But I think that the Canadian Bill of Rights is a great big wrench in that process. So my intention with this video is to alert people to the how do you say, the availability of a legal way, or a legal method of fighting, effectively fighting this stuff. And sadly, it's about the only way we can fight them, because they could beat us legally if we just like forgot about the Canadian Bill of Rights. It was almost forgotten. Like, I kind of pulled it out from under the rug and dusted it off and started waving it around. And thankfully, many other people are doing the exact same thing. So the level of awareness and understanding about the Canadian Bill of Rights is increasing rapidly every day. Remember that shampoo commercial? you tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and you see the whole screen filling up with all the people that now know. Well, there you go. That's what's happening with this. Every day, people are excited. People are using it, and it's having effects. And that'll be for a video for another day. I'll just leave this here at this. And on Stand For Thee on Tuesday, which I'm not sure what date that is, next Tuesday, or today's the 5th, 6th, 7th, I guess it would be, June 7th, they're going to have a Zoom, and they're going to hear about businesses that are staying open, and they're using the Canadian Bill of Rights successfully to this point. So you can email me if you want the Zoom number for that, and my email is mjslegalservices@yahoo.com. So have a good day, and we got this.